All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. As viewers of this channel know, I've done a lot of New Jersey-centric videos with people, and that includes a couple of members of a band that I used to play in years ago called Broken Heroes from New Jersey. My next guest is somebody who's not only wearing a Broken Heroes t-shirt, which is very cool, but somebody who really gave us a lot of helping hands during my second stint in the band in the mid 2000s. Good friend, great supporter of the scene. It's my pleasure to welcome from Delaware, Mr. Kurt Beers. Kurt, how's it going, man?
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Can you hear that siren behind me?
Yeah, what's going on?
I don't know, man. I think either someone's getting their car robbed or someone's alarm went off, but hopefully that goes away pretty soon. Kind of reminds me of the police sirens in Delaware, which we'll get into in a while, I'm sure. But there it goes. There it goes. It's done. Anyway, man, good to see you. It's been a while.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, totally. I think the last time you and I had an in-person conversation must have been 2008.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I mean, we do the Facebook thing, but
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
not real life.
yeah, definitely not these days for sure. Um, but I wanted to bring you on because you represent a scene that I haven't really gotten much into on this channel. So it's important to do so. And that would be the Delaware scene. And it's very rich history. I know there's been some efforts recently to shine a spotlight on Delaware, which we'll get into as well. But I wanted to bring you on and talk about that particular scene and its history and the fact that you did amazing work for a lot of bands as a promoter down there, mine included. So we're going to hit a lot of different topics. But let's kind of start off way back in the very beginning of things. When did music first become, such a big part of your life to where you would end up being, a musician for many years?
Yeah, I can tell you the very moment. I think I was probably 10 years old. I was riding my BMX bike downtown. I grew up in Newark, Delaware, a little college town. And there was a really cool record store. And I looked in the window and there was a band playing, right? 50s rock, the Commotions. And they owned this really cool record store and had a band. And I remember looking in the window and thinking, wow, you can do that in this town. I thought that was only something that you had to be from New York City to play in a rock and roll band, or Los Angeles. And something, clicked. And next thing you know, I buy a guitar, played with a bunch of bands early on. I think I bought my first guitar at 12. By 15, I didn't have a driver's license. I played in a really bad hardcore band with some buddies from school. We played one show, and then we started other bands later on that were early Wilmington, Delaware bands. Your Worst Nightmare, the Stiffs. The Stiffs was kind of a horror rock band. We had a lot of fun. The Stiffs played with Youth of Today. That was an interesting show.
Mhm.
We drove to Radnor, PA, which is like kind of an upper middle class, almost like a public private school. And we played with them. And of course, we're drinking beers on the way up and, the whole nine. And we're going to play with Youth of Today, right? So it's these drunk punks from Wilmington and Youth of Today. And we beat them in floor hockey. I'd like to make that official. We actually half drunk punk rock band with engineer boots and combat boots beat Youth of Today at floor hockey at Radnor High School. And that's where it all began.
Right on, right on. Um, since we're kind of starting with the 80s, I wanted to bring up something that's kind of unique in your history. I was a little kid back then. I was born in 77. So, in the 80s, there were a lot of very popular TV shows, and one of which was a show called America's Most Wanted. And I mention that not because you were on it, because you were wanted, but because you acted in one of the episodes I still remember clearly to this day. So we got to go there before we get into the other music because you were temporarily a stage of screen there for America's Most Wanted. So what in the world led to that happening?
So Charles Cohen, yeah, we all knew him. He played in a band called Bourbon and Clorox. Um, probably saw him play at a house party in Newark, Delaware back in the day. Um, we got My mom was contacted by America's Most Wanted because I played in a punk band. I had the punk equipment. It was all set up in my mom's basement. And a kid from the University of Delaware who went on to be the film editor for The Simpsons and King of the Hill arranged this whole thing. And so I'm not actually in the film. It's just my arm playing bass. And my mom found all these miscellaneous punk rock kids from around town and invited them over. Of course, I couldn't get home from work in time. They had already pretty much ripped my record collection apart and scratched up a bunch of records and just, smoking cigarettes in my mom's house and stuff, just being punks. And then we did this film in the basement, and then they packed up their stuff and went away. And that was kind of, yeah, that's an interesting piece of history that no one can seem to find. You can find almost any other episode but that one.
Mm.
So if you
And
ever find it, let me know.
and Cohen, he was the person who was wanted in that particular episode. What was his deal? What was his story?
He was the axe murderer of his parents.
Mm.
What's that? Patricide, right? He was from an upper middle class family in Hockessin, Delaware. I didn't know him personally, just to see his band play and stuff. I think some of the guys that were in that band are still around, probably doing music today.
Mm. Interesting, interesting. As far as interesting histories, I wanted to mention the location you're speaking to me from, because I know there's some history associated with that. So, aside from being in Delaware, where are you talking to me from, and why should we bring that up?
So this is the office of the oldest exterminating company in Delaware, and I am an exterminator. So this is also what used to be known as Porno Row here. This is Route 13 through Newcastle, Delaware. So back in the 70s and 80s, Delaware had some of the most lax pornography laws in America, similar to California, which kind of spawned this print industry for off-market hardcore porno magazines, which were then distributed down here and down Route 13 into Dover and Elkton, Maryland, right? This is also where our only serial killer, Delaware has one serial killer, that's Stephen Brian Pennell, who operated in this area because we have hotels everywhere. This really is the seediest spot in Delaware. I'm coming to you from right now. It is. I love it. I mean, it's kind of cool. It's like a time capsule. The woman that ran the exterminating company before we took over this building, on the last day, she got up, grabbed her purse, and just walked out,
Yeah.
and left documents and stuff from all the way back to the probably after World War II. Pretty cool stuff, but
Mm.
also has kind of a seedy history. So yeah, serial
Excellent.
killers.
Well, who knew Delaware, had this whole thing going on?
Yeah, I think those are our only, famous killers. We're
Yeah.
small. We're usually really nice. We don't do that sort of thing down here. You can remember. I remember Mike Fincy from Broken Heroes said to me one time, when you come over the Delaware Memorial Bridge, you take a breath of fresh air because you feel like you're with family. And
Oh,
that's kind of what we had going on.
well, we'll definitely get to that period of time when Broken Heroes would come down and play Delaware. Um, and he's absolutely right. I mean, it was always so much fun coming down there. We really felt like we were among our people when we played for you down there and the other bands who were around in Delaware at that time. I mean, was that spirit that we experienced kind of always the case with Delaware? Was that just the vibe from the 80s onward?
In a way, yeah. In a way, just like any other scene. Sure, we had a lot of people that worked together well. But we were young, so there were rivalries and competition and stuff. We used to joke, we'd say some guys played sports and we played in hardcore punk bands. We could be a little bit oppositional, but in the end we all kind of made it happen and figured it out. And then actually the Barons period in Mojo 13 was kind of all these people coming back and playing again as actual adults, which was fun.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's the point in time when you and I first crossed paths. I played in Broken Heroes in the 90s. And then early 2000s, I moved to Los Angeles for a few years. I came back to New Jersey for a couple of years there in 2006. Reconnected with Pete, our good friend Jersey Pete from Broken Heroes.
Yes, sir.
And Broken Heroes, they seem pretty stable right now in their lineup, but they were always needing somebody in the band, you know.
Yeah.
In this case, they're looking for a drummer, and it just kind of made sense. You know, nobody really quits Broken Heroes. They just kind of take a break from it. So I think I'm probably going to end up back in that band at some point when I'm 60,
Oh, I hope so.
you know. And when Pete's son is going to be in the band, I'm sure that's going to
Yeah.
happen. So I rejoined the band and we hit the gate pretty hard as far as doing shows. I think we were playing within a couple weeks. You know, we did CBs and a ton of shows with that version of the band that you knew. And then you can help me out with this because I can't remember, but we got contacted by you, I believe, um, to come down and play Mojo 13 in Delaware. I think that was the first time we had played and met all of you guys. Do I have that right?
Yeah. I would say let's thank Tom from MySpace while we're talking about this because
Yes.
honestly, I don't know how I would have operated this whole project, without the help of MySpace. Um, and it was just so much nicer.
Oh yeah.
Give you
Oh yeah.
some free music. There was no opportunity for any sort of really back and forth. It was just like my band's playing here. But that's how man, I'll tell you, yeah, Dusty knew you guys he had played in a band called Road to Ruin. I don't know if you were in Broken Heroes at the time, but he says, hey, why don't you contact these guys? But, the thing that I learned, the big difference between some of the early stuff that I did musically and then that era that you were a part of was it was about being cool in the post punk era, right? So we all played hardcore and punk, and then we ended up doing post punk because that's what was the fashion or what have you. So, that scene was very much who is cooler than who kind of a thing. Um, and breaking into Philadelphia at the time could be a little bit difficult for a band from Delaware or South Jersey, honestly. But in the end, it was just another stage of the music. The thing that I wanted to try differently with our era, the Mojo 13 era, was like actually building community with people because I knew that you need a lot of cool people. You can't be cool alone, right? Some guys are so cool that they break out, think of anybody, Nirvana, whoever. But no, we were never going to be that cool. So I felt like we need to make friends up in North Jersey, Lehigh Valley, down in Baltimore. Let's do this and trade shows. And it was great. I mean, it worked out fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I always had a great time playing Mojo 13. Um, this goes back a few years, but if I remember correctly, one thing that really impressed me, and I'm sure impressed the other Broken Heroes, is everybody was very cool, um, very welcoming, and you took care of us because we were a band that was coming down from Jersey, you know, and I remember you always took care of us financially as well. And you were always very stand up about that. That's what the like stands out for me about that time. Plus the fact you guys were just a lot of fun. You know, you and Dusty were in a band called the Barons during that time, and I think almost every show, if not every show we did in Delaware was with you guys. Um, and we always looked forward to that. You know, there are a lot of places, you know yourself, bands play, and it's kind of like you kind of show up and you get through the gig, and then that's kind of it. Like not every scene is what you guys had. But
Yeah,
whenever we were associated with you guys, it was always like we knew we were going to have a great time. We knew, it was going to be worth the trip. Um, Always a lot of great times there. I would say my favorite times being a member of Broken Heroes was playing Delaware with you guys. Um,
that's nice to hear.
yeah. So
That's
tell
what
me
we were
about
trying to do.
yeah, and you guys did it, man. I mean, everybody was cool. There are other bands that were playing around that time we'll get into for sure. Um, Tell me about Mojo 13 and that venue and how you got involved with them.
Yeah, so that bar's in my neighborhood. and a gentleman, Jared Schaefer, bought that thing with the idea that he was going to do local music. Prior to that, it was more of a towny bar kind of thing, a couple of older folks sitting at the bar sipping, beer. Um, I walked in, just pulled over, coming home from work, and I said, "Hey, man, can I book shows here?" And he said, "Sure." What you can have Fridays and Saturdays, because he had just started and he needed to get off the ground. So I started booking shows there almost every weekend, and Broken Hero sold a lot of beer. That's why you got paid, because we all sang songs about beer. I mean, the idea was with the Barons was we're going to end up in dive bars, right? Playing this kind of music. So every song was about beer, and we sold a lot of beer. We brought in a good crowd. It wasn't, hey, nobody was getting rich, right? But if you put 100 drunks
Uh,
that like rock and roll in the same room, you're going to have a good time. And then every band, I tried to bring in bands like you guys and headline you. Like, these guys are from New Jersey, they
yeah,
came all the way down here, and people loved that, and they would get excited. And we had a lot of Jersey bands down, the Wretched Ones, Turnpike Rex, a lot of guys. And yeah, it was a good time. That's what we were trying to do. We wanted people to feel welcome.
yeah, you definitely accomplished that. It was always something to look forward to do. It was always a lot of fun. I personally think the best show we played there was that Agent Orange show you played.
Yeah,
And great bill. It was Agent Orange headlined, obviously. Broken Heroes, the Barons. I think Turnpike Rex was on that bill as
I
well.
believe so. Yeah.
And there may be one or two other bands, and I apologize for forgetting, but awesome show. And I remember Agent Orange, at that point in time, had Dusty Watson on drums, who played with Lita Ford. He was in Legs Diamond. He ended up playing drums in the Sonics when the Sonics got back together. And Dusty's an old surf dude. He's like an actual musician. And I remember he did a drum solo. Remember that? Like an
Yep.
actual real drum solo, like a Buddy Rich kind of drum solo, and people were like losing their minds. And they were actually just a bunch of friendly guys too in Agent
Yeah.
Orange. That was one of
Yeah. They
the,
were great.
definitely one of the better experiences I had as a member of Broken Heroes for sure. You mentioned Wretched Ones and bands like that. What are some other shows that really stood out for you putting on down there at Mojo 13?
Yeah, so I brought a couple bands from England over. One of them actually played in a different club, but that was the Glory. They did a reunion tour. That was interesting. Great guys, old Oi band from England, and the biggest British band I brought over to Mojo 13 was Resistance 77
Mm,
with Dave Heyman, who also played in Super Yob, and they were all kind of friends of Frankie Flame. That South London, really melodic Oi kind of stuff. Um, yeah, that was great. Although I think Resistance 77 is actually from Nottingham, but that would have been Nottingham and Agent Orange. I'm just going to assume they're from Orange County, right?
mm. Yeah.
Those were the bands that were from really far away. So I bought these guys, these British guys, hoagies, and they didn't know what the hell that was. But to this day, they remember that, man, the food is so good. Um, and actually, one of the members of Resistance 77 vacations in Delaware now. So
Cool.
bring a band from Nottingham over and have them fall in love with Delaware was kind of cool. Yeah, the Wretched Ones, they were great, man. We played with them many, many times. And towards the end of their career, in Allentown and in some different places. And I can't say enough nice things about those guys, honestly. You know,
Yeah, I see BT every so often now. I have a buddy in New Jersey who has a recording studio, and it's where I go down to record all my drums at.
nice.
Brew Studios, part of New Jersey, by the way. And the guy who runs it, Kevin, is a sweetheart, and he's done a lot of stuff down there. Electric Frankenstein and a bunch of Jersey bands. Yeah, Howie Pyro from D-Gen, rest in peace, recorded some stuff there. I think Damien from Sam Hain may have done some stuff. So, he's kind of connected with that scene. And Billy BT. is an old buddy of Kevin. So Kevin throws these like massive quarterly parties at his place at the studio. And it's like a barbecue and people hang out during the day, but at night everybody goes in the studio and has like these massive jam sessions.
Nice.
I still see BT. We jam, over at Kevin's and never recorded or anything, just kind of, you drink a few beers, you play some Stones covers, that sort of thing. So yeah, BT's doing well. Trying to talk to Armin about coming on here. So
Yeah, that would be cool.
yeah, totally. Hopefully that happens. The other show that I remember a lot was and I'll intro this way. Broken Heroes was playing at Mojo 13, late 2006. And I bring it up because I just published my Misfits book. First thing I published. And I had a little box of books with me. And this guy comes over who I know is in another one of the bands playing that night because he introduced himself as the drummer for this band called Alleged Bricks. And he's like, "Oh, you got a Misfits book? Yeah, I dig those guys." So he takes out. I would think I was charging $10. He hands me a $10 bill. I had him a book. We're talking. I'm like, "Yeah, so you're playing tonight?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah. I'm playing this band." And he's like, "Yeah, I remember Misfits back in the day. I've been playing in the DC area for a long time." And we had Matt, the roadie from Broken Heroes at the time. He was next to me. And we just looked at each other. We went, "You're Ken Stacks from Scream." It hadn't dawned on me. So Ken Stacks, another rest in peace, was the first person who ever paid money for anything I published.
Wow.
Yeah. So
That's cool.
thank you, Kent. And they were awesome. I mean, what a band.
We
Uh,
did a split CD with them, the Barons and Alleged Bricks, and we played with them as often as we could. They were old friends of Dusty's from old bands. Yeah, they were cool too. I'm trying to there's we I think I did 65 shows there.
wow.
So that's a lot of bands, Coffin Cats, just a lot of different kinds of bands too, mostly punk, of course. And we had a whole slew of great local bands too. So, there was you never had trouble finding bands.
Yeah.
And
What was that band that was really good? They were on the heavy side. F Tradition?
yeah. Oh, you know what? Let me tell you about those guys because the early part of my music career um, ended when I got married and had kids. I just had too many other responsibilities and didn't play music for quite some time, right? Kids got a little bit older. One night, um, my wife says, "Let's go to Gators or whatever it was called at the time," because this club in Newcastle had been called 10 different things, but would always have the bravery to host almost any type of event. Anything from midget wrestling to, skinhead music. They didn't care. So we went down there. We hadn't been to a local show in probably 7 years. Well, I think it was a metal show, and the opening band was F Tradition. And I had never seen them before. And they were these young kids from Newcastle. And Newcastle was the last city in Delaware to get into music, let's say,
Mhm.
right? The college town was first. The only big city we have was second. Big city. That's, the only city we have. And then Newcastle later on had its own crop of kids that played music. Well, this singer he was out of control. He was spitting hockers up into the air and catching them in his mouth and all this kind of stuff, and looked like just really intimidating. Like this guy was a big boy and
Mhm.
he would just pound you, right? After the show, he came up and gave us some stickers and was the nicest kid. I mean, the sweetest guy. We lost him several years ago, unfortunately. DJ Albright was his name. And that band, I said, I hadn't done anything musically in a while. And a friend of mine that I work with just dropped a bunch of money on recording equipment. Let's bring these kids in. So I did my first EP with them, which was, I brought some show and tell here.
I have
And
that. Yeah.
yeah. And this was the resurgence of my record label, Net Records. That was the first thing I did, recorded for free in a garage in Wilmington, and it is it great? No, but they were great, as performance art, they were just a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and always willing to open every show. never got their feelings hurt, but they were just great to work with. And that kind of got me back into coming up with what else do you need when you have, all right, we have a band, we have a club, now we have friends elsewhere that we can trade shows with. What else do you need? A record label, right? So my idea was, let's all these bands that we play with, and I put out these two
Yep.
named after a Broken Heroes song,
Yep.
We Don't Pay the Bills, volume 1 and 2, with all kinds of great bands on there, even a band from Canada. And it was, the East Coast Oi kind of style. And that took off actually. Just these little cheap, what I would do is make them look like a 7-inch record. These are CDRs that were mass produced over in Camden somewhere, right? You have a sleeve, and it's kind of like a 45. It's just a CDR. It's got printing on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I could give them away. I wouldn't feel bad about it. They were $1.07 each. So I sent some to Europe, to Germany and the Czech Republic. And thanks again to Tom from MySpace. I found these record labels in Europe, and we ended up with these, right?
Mm.
They started getting other people to produce my music. All I had to do was send them the tracks and the artwork. This is the Incited. I was very proud of them. Very kind of like patriotic street punk, high energy, really good guys. And then we found a Czech label that also put out, you remember Mad Dog Surrender, our friends from Lehigh Valley. Those guys were really instrumental in bringing the Barons up to Allentown. And, that's a good story. Have you ever heard of Catasauqua, Pennsylvania? Nobody has. It's a little hill town north of Allentown. Mad Dog Surrender invited the Barons up. And I mean to tell you, we got treated like rock stars, like I've never been treated in my life. We pulled up in our van and car, and people were whispering, is this the Barons? We put all the way from Wilmington, Delaware on the flyer sarcastically, but they kind of took it literally. And it was an interesting mix of people. I don't think there was a single punk rocker there. What we had was all these people that wandered in. And as far as they were concerned, we were, I don't know, we were Thin Lizzy. It was the greatest rock and roll show in town that night for sure.
That reminds me of a Broken Heroes gig. No, it wasn't Broken Heroes. It was my band before then, Squiggy, Headache Records band I was in.
I remember.
And we're playing some VFW hall in bumfuck New Jersey. I don't even know where it was. And we're setting up, and one of the Legionnaires, I guess,
Yeah.
came over, and he's a pretty grizzled dude. Had definitely seen some shit. And he's like, "So what kind of music do you guys play?" And I'm like, "Oh, here we go." I'm like, "Oh, we play heavy stuff like punk rock." He goes, "Oh, cool. I'll be sure to check you out." I'm like, "Okay." So we play, and as we're playing, another Legionnaire comes in. He's like, "Oh, the show's getting out of control. There are too many people." And this other guy who I'd spoken to earlier was like, "Let them play, man. This is great. Let them do their thing." And he like shut the other guy up. He's like, "All right, fine."
Yeah.
So we played, and like I'm breaking down my drums. Guy comes over to me. He's like, "Man, I haven't seen wild stuff like that since I used to hang with HR." And I went, "What?" It turns out the guy was an old roadie for the Bad Brains back in the day.
Nice.
He was pals with them and like knew all those guys, and so you never know.
Yeah.
You never know who you're playing for.
Find weirdos everywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and our scene certainly attracted many of them at one
Yeah.
time. So in amongst all this stuff, you had the Neck Records label, and I'm very happy that, Broken Heroes, when I was in the band, we recorded a bunch of stuff, but I think the only stuff that's ever been released is the stuff that you put out, if I
Oh,
recall.
really? Yeah,
I
you
might,
guys had what, 1 or 2 songs on each one of these things?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if anything else has come out yet. that we recorded back then. We recorded a bunch of stuff at a studio that the drummer who's in the band now, Quincy, was involved in. So it was like super easy to record stuff. But I don't know whatever became of some of that stuff. I should really find out. But while all that's going on with you, you had the Barons, which was the band that you were in when Broken Heroes was coming down there. So let's get into that because I'm pals with you, I'm pals with Dusty. The other guys were always super cool. So when did the Barons first start taking shape?
2006. I didn't think I'd play again. We played in Dusty's basement. I can't believe that these people put up with this shit, honestly. I mean, this was a duplex right in the city of Wilmington. And we played you saw us. We were loud. And we'd be down in that basement every Tuesday night religiously making that noise, and no one cared. Apparently, the other side of the duplex, the guy played like the Irish tin whistle and a bunch of different Irish instruments that he would play loudly on his porch. So nobody cared. It was kind of cool. And from there, we recorded with my friend that had the studio equipment. Hey, I got a band now. Let me come in and record this. So we gave it a shot, and our very first demo became vinyl in Germany. And we're like, hey, maybe we can make a run with this
Mm.
and have some fun. It was kind of, I know this sounds boorish, but we all played in bands when we were younger. Then we all had to work and have lives and wives and kids and that sort of thing. So the Barons and all of those bands that you guys played with from that time, Hell Bomber and Honor Among Thieves and all the other bands that played locally at Mojo 13 came back, and it was cool. I kind of touched on that earlier, and so we just had fun with it. And we didn't know what was going to happen. I think maybe when I was young, I probably thought I was going to be a rock star when I was 19 years old, right? This time, though, what I said in the Barons was, I want to be able to say I played in a punk rock band until I was 40 years old. And I think we lasted until I was about 43. So, and we played probably twice a month. We weren't afraid to play anywhere that was no more than an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
you know? So, but we had a lot of fun and we made a lot of friends. And I'm glad I did it. Really, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Great band, man. Always a lot of fun. I still have those records here.
Thank you.
I go through them once in a while and put them on, and it takes me right back to those days, And considering what everybody's gone through with COVID and just being older, and seeing our buddies start to leave,
Yeah, yeah,
it's cool to go back and find like the F Tradition record and Mad Dog Surrender and the Turnpike Rex and all that
yeah.
stuff.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. So. I do want to mention something else too, because and it's come up in other conversations on this channel. I talked about it with Mike Fincy, talked about it with I believe Tim and Pete from Broken Heroes when they were on, and that's the riot that happened in Delaware.
Which one?
Well, okay, I, I can't. It wasn't at Mojo 13. It was at a bigger place in Newark, and I think it was one of yours. I think. And it was hardcore and oi. Like an oi band would play
Yeah,
over
yeah,
a hardcore band, and there'd be, and something was off that day. Like the vibe was off in the
yeah,
crowd,
yeah,
and that eventually led to just like total violence, like this, and all spilled out into the parking lot. Someone from Broken Heroes, who I will not mention by name, jumped into the fray and ended up walking out with blood all over his hands. And a guy had a
yeah,
baseball bat with like wire. And you know what I'm talking about? Do you remember
yeah.
that?
I remember it. So that was not my show.
Okay. Okay.
That was booked by somebody else, and we were invited
Okay.
to be involved with finding bands to put on the bill. I think that was a territorial thing, honestly. I think that was Delaware versus Philly. Um, or, who knows? But I think, was it Chip? said, don't come to Delaware looking for a fight, right? You're going to get exactly what you came looking for. So we had a little bit of a reputation there for a while. So yeah, that show that was a riot. You guys didn't play. We prime times lounge, chairs flying everywhere, people being knocked over, cafe tables outside, the entire parking lot erupting into a riot. That was definitely Delaware versus Philly. But of course, there are other people that would come and also want to challenge us from New Jersey, and the gangs that were around at the time, and sometimes it wasn't good, honestly. I did have a show that I more or less had to shut down because a gang didn't like who was there. I wasn't even in the know. I picked this person up from the airport. Who he was involved in a website that would outed righties of
Oh,
some sort. That the Barons were not a political band. Like every song was. We might touch on a social issue just barely. So the politics was a little difficult at times. This guy was outing right wingers who were part of the scene or whatever, and obviously that makes people angry. So I didn't know who this guy was, but that show erupted in karate kicks and all kinds of crap. One of the band was a bunch of Marine combat veterans. It just wasn't good.
yeah. That was
It
the
kind
only
of, it
that was
kind of ruined it for me for a little while.
that was like the only time there was ever something that crazy in Newark, Delaware. That one show we played. I didn't think it was one of yours. It didn't feel like one of yours. One of
Yeah.
yours was always like casual and cool, and people were just friends. Weird
Yeah.
vibe. And I remember the classic skinhead chant because the skinheads just fucked up these hardcore kids like a hot knife through butter.
Yeah.
And they were like, we are skinheads, we bust heads, which is brilliant, but also ridiculous at the same time. Um, but, and I remember Christ, we played Allentown with Broken Heroes. And the funny thing is with Broken Heroes, that particular lineup. You know, you had a couple guys in the band with Jewish heritage. We weren't really, I mean, we sang it. The earlier band was a little bit more aesthetically skinhead.
Yeah.
I certainly never was. I mean, nature made me one, but I was never implied. Um, we were never like that. We were just goofballs.
Yeah.
But for some reason, these dudes who were, like the Rommel Juniors of the world fucking loved us. Like they would just come over and like, hey, Broken Heroes, and my attitude was always be cool with them. It's like this is their town.
Yeah.
Obviously their minds, they want to feel, you know, so treat them respectfully, make them feel like they're a big deal, be super polite to them, and they'll leave you alone. And they generally did. But for some reason, man, these weirdo fuckers would show up, and display their whole thing, like, have like fucking t-shirts with like Nazi generals on them. Be
Wow.
Yeah, so like it was wild, man. And we were always polite. We're like, let's just get through this fucking gig and not get killed, you know?
Yeah, we definitely the Barons. I mean, the Barons were not skinheads. We didn't look like skinheads. We just looked like a bunch of Delaware rednecks. Um, we played in Allentown once, and I can remember pulling up, and all of a sudden the Allentown police are just have us blocked in, right? And they get out, and I'm trying to pull my rig out of the back of my vehicle, and he says, "Is this a race party?" And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. It didn't occur to me. I said, "You mean like NASCAR?" And he says, "Don't be a fucking smartass with me." And I said, "Look, man, we're just a rock and roll band from Wilmington, Delaware that got invited up here to play." So they left us alone. And as it turned out, it wasn't like that. It was us and the wretched ones. I think honestly at that time, the wretched ones were burning out on that type of shit, because they also had that crowd. And that would have been, I think, one of the last shows they played.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on it. You have to ask Mike or Billy. Um, the Yeah, that became a little bit of a problem for us. And then oddly enough, one of my old bands calls me up, says, "Hey, let's do some reunion shows. We want to do this benefit for a bicycle project in Wilmington to give kids bikes." I said, "Hell yeah!" Right. And that was the Stiffs. Now remember, we're from Delaware. We didn't know there was a famous band called the Stiffs. We got our records from the mall at that time. We were so young. We probably had the Dead Kennedys and shit like that. And, the Exploited, I remember that was a weird one to find there. So we were the Stiffs, and we did like horror punk type, the Misfits, the Ramones, that type of stuff. I wrote the songs. They were kind of fun. They were kind of like horror punk if Bob Hope wrote it, like pretty innocent. We were teenagers, and we did these reunion shows, and people came from all over because, of course, your friends scatter, across the earth, and everybody came home. It was right before Thanksgiving, so that's the best time to do a show, right? I think the night before Thanksgiving was
Oh yeah.
always successful night for rock and roll. So everybody came in. You look out, and it's like everybody's really having a good time and smiling, and it's a mixed crowd of all kinds of people that just remember this local neighborhood band that was fun and did house parties and shit. And it kind of that perspective, after I got that, made me feel a little bit weird about the Barons, to be honest with you, because we were kind of the gigs were getting a little bit more, a little darker vibe, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a shame when that happens, Like I said, when we would go somewhere with Broken Heroes and that element would kind of turn up, you know. I was always cool. I was cool to everybody. I mean, that was my philosophy because also I'm in somebody else's neighborhood, I'm in somebody else's home, and you don't fuck with that,
Yeah,
so I mean I'm kind of happy to be playing shows in general, so I'm usually in a pretty good mood to begin with.
yeah,
So I never fucked with anybody, but I mean, there were definitely people who were looking for a fight, and
yeah.
my philosophy was always don't be the person to give them what they craved. Be nice,
Yeah.
to them, you know, um, you know, if they come up and compliment your band, you thank them, and that's it, and you don't get into it. But there were a few people I was looking at, and a couple of times, and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like you go out in public looking like this, like this is what, if you get into a car accident here, you're gonna die in that silly fucking outfit with the Rommel and the thing, you know?
Yeah, you know what? Yeah. We didn't have a lot of that in Delaware. We certainly had a lot of skinheads, obviously. Um, but the most popular band from that scene, Stormwatch, was really not political. So there wasn't that type of vibe really here. That came from elsewhere. Sometimes they'd visit us and behave themselves. And a couple times they didn't want to behave themselves, you know.
Yeah.
You could usually just say, "Hey, look, this is a public bar. Um, it's a private business, but you're welcome here. As long as you don't cause any problems." I'd have to tell them that as the promoter or whatever. Oddly enough, we had a Misfits cover band that really, attracted that crowd.
Huh.
And well, I mean, I always felt like that a certain part of that subculture, music is not the most important aspect of it, right? Other things are more important, maybe politics or loyalty or whatever it is, and it's not even necessarily music. So you would meet these skinheads that are like, they've got the whole outfit, but they're listening to Metallica, Slayer, the Misfits, the big ones that everybody knows, maybe not necessarily digging into it like, right now in Philadelphia, there's an amazing skinhead scene going on that doesn't have anything to do with politics. It's just great people. You go to the shows. I've seen Broken Heroes up there recently. And it's a little bit more fashion oriented, of course, but I'll take that over, just blind aggression at this point. I'm 56 years old. And fashion, honestly, has never been very important to me, and I could tell you why. So when I was 15 years old, you couldn't get Doc Martens, right? My buddy shaved my head. I wanted the whole thing, right? So you couldn't get Doc Martens in Delaware for sure, and not even in Philly. So I took a train by myself up to Broadway in New York and bought a pair of Doc Martens, and I was so proud. And then I walked down the street and I had to take a leak in an alleyway, and I stepped in a big lump of shit in brand new boots. I told the guy, throw these old combat boots away. I don't even want them. 15 years old, strutting very proudly down Broadway. I got to take a leak, go into an alleyway and smoosh.
Ah,
And it just kind of, at that point, it was kind of cathartic. I was just like, you know what? Fashion is bullshit. And of course, you can't even find a stick, you
yeah,
know. And I got like the grip sole, so it's all, geez,
yeah.
and it smelled like ether. I got back on the train, stunk up the whole car. You know, I did save them. When I got home, I hosed them off with the garden hose, and I didn't tell anybody this story until just now. But that's why I was never into the fashion of things. It's all good if everybody else wants to be, but I will give some credit to Hostel City, who's booking shows up in Philly. They're bringing in oi bands that are just a lot of fun to see, and it's refreshing to see that, like Ultra Sect and Doug and the Slugs. I got to see them up there, and we lost him recently too.
Yeah.
So, and it's a cool vibe, it's nice people, and it's glad to see that. I'm glad to see that happen again, because there obviously, as you well know, there was a dark period.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And I still keep in touch with the Broken Heroes guys, and they're playing gigs and still doing their thing. And it's nice to see that going on, especially as people get older and have their own things going on, to come out and still be a part of it.
Yeah,
Um, it's
it's
good.
a lot.
It's good to see bands out there being healthy, putting out records and being a part of things.
Yeah,
Uh,
and there's
so
some good stuff.
yeah, yeah, oh, yeah, there's
Good stuff, definitely.
great stuff out there. Um, Now with Delaware, I understand that there is some, perhaps even quite a bit of work going on at the moment to do a documentary on the Delaware punk and oi history. Where are things at with that, and what can you tell me about what the aims are for that?
This idea gets kicked around all the time, because this was the forgotten scene. I may have said that earlier. But we had so many great bands, and we had a great time, and we did it all right here without having to go anywhere else. And we have equipment, we have some young folks that are interested in it. So we have a Delaware Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but to be honest, that's for boomers, because they had their scene too,
Right.
obviously, right? They had their own bands. George Thorogood, Tommy Conwell's Young Rumblers. There was music back in those days as well, and that museum is more or less dedicated to that generation. Although they did have a display where I did a little punk rock thing for them, with some records and demo tapes and stuff. In City Hall, they had this in City Hall. But there are some younger kids, and you want to get the younger kids, right? Because they've got the energy. And so, two young guys just contacted me the other day and said, "Hey, we're doing a documentary. We've got all the film equipment we need. We need audio. And if you can rummage up flyers and stuff that we can use." So I'll meet with them, and we'll see what comes of that. But I guess they're going to do kind of I don't know, think of some of the scenes that have done that. Salt Lake City hardcore, right? What was that one?
Yeah.
So, I don't think it'll get that big, but we'll see what happens. You never know. But it was interesting, and we had a lot of great bands, and a few of them kind of broke out. And I'm talking about just general music from here, not just punk, but we've had a couple bands like Spindrift, who moved to Hollywood, California, and made a name for themselves. Did a lot of Western movie soundtracks. Those were a bunch of guys from Newark, Delaware. Zen Gorilla was a big band that most people have heard of, that came out of this scene. And Sean Pierce, from the Toilet Boys, is also from Delaware. So, some of us did break out of this little tiny scene, but you had to go somewhere else. You had to, Sean went to New York, Zangarilla went to Philly, and then they went to San Francisco. Spindrift went to Hollywood. You had to there's not that much of a support system here. You're basically playing dive bars. I love that. I love dive bars, always have. But if you intend to make a living or have someone remember who you are, you certainly would want to make it out of here. you know.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, it's cool. There's some action as far as documenting, that particular place. One thing I've learned a lot doing this channel is even in New Jersey, for example, I covered what was going on in Newark pretty extensively, talking to like Emilio and the Pipeline and associated bands. Um, and then you get down to like New Brunswick, a bit further south, and there's like this whole other scene.
Yeah.
You go to like Clifton, and then there's like this whole like alternative dance thing that was kind of going on at the same time as the punk thing, and so I love sort of digging into different scenes and seeing the culture and what people were doing. So it's wonderful. There's been some action or some thought about taking Delaware and kind of doing the same thing with it. I think
Yeah.
it's
I think it'll be great. We had a lot of great music and a lot of cool people. Um, to get that out there will be fun. Yeah, every scene is kind of, unique in its own way. And as a music fan, I've always you notice there's a sort of sound that develops too, right? From scene to scene. And sometimes you discover this scene that's like, wow, these people are doing really cool shit in Danbury, Connecticut, or wherever, right?
yeah,
That's always fun. When I was a kid, they had, the Nuggets. You remember the Nuggets compilations?
sure.
There was a rip-off Nuggets compilation from Germany called Mind Rocker. And they would do like a record of all Chicago, pre-punk bands or, in these different regions. And it's kind of cool to listen to the sound. But Delaware doesn't have that because our influences are coming from every direction. Discord Records in DC. I played in a band called Marcus Hook. Our first album was decidedly very Discord influenced with some Husker Du sprinkled in there or something, right? But there's everything going on. You can't say it's like Headache Records. You guys in North Jersey, you did develop a certain sound, right? Jersey Oi.
Right.
We didn't really necessarily have that. We had all kinds of shit going on, like people just doing whatever fell in place. But as a whole, it's some very interesting stuff, and we had some good times.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. And like I said, I appreciate the fact you welcomed Broken Heroes into some of those good times. I appreciate Neck Records and what you did with that.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
it's an important time capsule for me that gets more important the longer I'm away from it. The more time goes away from that period, the more I appreciate it. When you're in the moment of something, you don't think to yourself, oh, this is going to be part of City Hall or this is going to be in a documentary. You're just kind of, getting through the show, worrying about where you're going to sleep that night,
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
yeah, the gas money. Are you going to be, depending on when you're playing, you're going to be wrecked the next day for work or whatever.
Yeah,
So it's nice years later to realize, like, wow, when all that was going on, there was something being built that is still, there's a record of it, literally and figuratively. There's a record of it showing
yeah.
what actually happened. So, you were a big part of that, man. So I appreciate everything you did for us. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing a bit of that history with me.
My pleasure, sir.
Absolutely. We will have to do this again soon.
Thank you.
Absolutely, dude. Good seeing you, my friend.
Always good to see you, brother.